Italy, August 1944. The air shimmered like it was on fire. Heat crawled down the armor, turning the hull into a furnace. Inside Sherman tank number 23, it smelled of oil, dust, and men who hadn't breathed clean air in days. Every bolt trembled. The temperature gauge trembled too, deep in the red. I slapped the dial. Nothing. The radiator hissed, a dying animal under the floorboards. Then silence. One by one, the tanks behind us stopped, engines coughing, stalling, dead. The line went still in the valley dust. Only ours kept moving. The old M4 groaned, gears grinding, a wounded beast refusing to die. I could feel my homemade rig humming under my boots, the scavenged tubing, the patched seals, the little pump I wasn't supposed to build. Command had called it tampering with government property. But the others were stranded, and we were still alive. I gripped the improvised lever wrapped in duct tape, and for the first time that day, the engine purred instead of screamed. And I thought, why was my tank breathing when all the others were choking? August 9, 1944, Arno Valley, Italy. The map made it look simple, one arrow crossing pale contour lines, 60 miles to Monte Vico. Headquarters called it a forced push. No stops. No repairs. No complaints. On paper, fuel bozers met us at checkpoints, engines stayed cool, dust behaved like weather instead of ground glass. On paper, everything breathes. Out here the air was 40 degrees and rising. The valley baked. Dust rolled off the road like flour and crawled into everything, carb throats, magnetos, our lungs. Through the periscope the world trembled, a mirage of olive trees and white roads. I listened past the rattle and felt the engine the way a man feels his own pulse. Continental R975 radial, 9 pots, angry and thirsty, never loved the crawl. It was born for propellers and sky, we were feeding it heat and stones. Hashtag 23, maintain interval. No halts, the radio said. The net crackled with voices I knew and one I didn't, a captain from division repeating the rule like a prayer. I kept my hand on the shifter, palm sweating against worn Bakelite, heel braced to the floor where my illegal creature hummed, a secondary loop of hose and scrounged fittings hidden under plates, a Jeep pump bolted to a bracket I'd filed smooth by moonlight. The manual said, use only authorized equipment. The manual also said, engine temperature nominal under field conditions. Our field conditions boiled. We rolled out before dawn with 5 Shermans in column, M4s bristling with track grousers and spare links welded on like armor charms. By mid-morning 2 were stopping to cool, hatches up, crew shirts dark with sweat. Lieutenant Danner called me on company, Carter, watch your temp. I answered, steady, though the needle was flirting with the red. Behind my words I listened, fan pitch, oil pressure, the faint hiss at the radiator cap. When heat rises, metal speaks. Regulations lived in our pockets, 4 pages laminated with grease, no field alterations to power plant, cooling, or fuel delivery. I'd signed them. We all had. But in Sicily I learned a simple truth, the army hates improvisation until it needs it. In June we ran a pass where one tank cooked itself idling during a roadblock. I watched a good crew bail out through steam like ghosts. After that night I collected lengths of copper line, a surplus relay, rubber from a dead truck. I bled my knuckles on the hull and built something the paperwork didn't recognize. The push demanded averages, X miles per day, Y gallons per mile. A staff major explained it to us on a chalkboard, neat arrows and clean arithmetic. He did not draw the grades where you climb in second gear at 2000 RPM and the air stalls around the engine well. He did not draw German G*NS in the folds of these hills, or the way dust cakes a radiator core until it chokes like a smoker. Fuel point green at 1100. No maintenance, the net said. We passed a line of ambulances sunk to the axles, medics shoveling like miners. A mule cart tried to keep pace and gave up. Heat waves bent the road. I cracked the hatch for air and caught the smell I know better than my own name, hot oil, paint, cordite ghosts. Tony, my driver, had a rag tied at his neck and both feet gentle on the pedals, coaxing the clutch like a skittish horse. The order not to stop made a kind of sense if you lived on a map. Every halt was a target. Every open engine deck was a flare for German range tables. But every mile pulled heat into the block, and the only thing more dangerous than a stationary target is a seized one. I had a choice to make, and I had made it a week ago with a hacksaw. So I kept the loop primed and the pump off, pretending I was still army perfect. We moved through farm walls, past wells where kids stared at the column like it was a procession for the dead. My headset buzzed with small lies from every crew, temperature normal. Holding. All good. We were all telling the same story to the same God. By noon the first tank died clean, a cough, a rattle, then that awful stillness when the big fan quits. The column bunched, then lurched. No halts, the radio insisted. Sun hammered the plates. Sweat ran down my spine and pooled at the small of my back. I laid my fingertips on the floor and felt the heat come through. Regulation said I was not an engineer. The valley said otherwise. Before the war, I was just another mechanic from Amarillo. The shop sat at the edge of town, 1 bay wide, roof of corrugated tin that clattered in every wind. I fixed harvesters, milk trucks, once even a sheriff's motorcycle when the county couldn't afford a new one. Folks paid in bacon, sometimes moonshine, once a goat that got loose the same night. It wasn't much, but machines talked to me. They always had. Engines breathe, I used to tell my customers. You can hear the pulse in the idle, the way a man breathes through his nose when he's sick. Listen long enough, and you know what's dying. Most didn't believe me, but they came back because their tractors ran smooth afterward. I never kept a ledger, I kept a rhythm. Wrench, rag, listen. Wrench again. When the draft notice came in 42, my father said, "They'll need you fixing airplanes." That's what I thought too. I'd seen the pictures, sleek P-40s, the kind of machines that sounded like freedom itself. On the enlistment form I checked Air Corps mechanic. I imagined propellers shining over Texas soil. 2 months later I was knee-deep in mud at Fort Knox, staring at a thing that looked like a locomotive without rails. 30 tons of armor plate, 75mm G*N, gas engine meant for a plane, an M4 Sherman. Someone said, "Congratulations, grease monkey. You're an engineer now." The sergeant barked the rule every morning: you drive, you maintain, you obey. You don't invent. The first time I climbed inside, the smell hit me: paint, fuel, rubber, men. Everything closed around you like a steel coffin. I ran my hand over the dashboard, the dials trembling from idle vibration. The Continental R975 radial behind the bulkhead thumped like a caged heart. Beautiful, but wrong. Air engines want wind, tanks give them dust and heat. I knew it before the manuals told me. Training felt endless: how to field strip a Browning, how to traverse a turret, how to log maintenance the Army way, no improvisation, no shortcuts. They gave us books thicker than Bibles, every line ending with the same warning: unauthorized modification voids warranty and may endanger crew. A warranty in wartime, there's a joke somewhere in that. I wrote letters home at night, greasy fingerprints on every page. Told my father about the engines, the noise, the smell of gear oil mixed with coffee. He wrote back once, "Remember, Billy, metal has memory. Treat it right and it'll remember you." By the time we shipped out, I'd stopped believing in perfect machines. Sicily taught that quick. The heat their K** led engines faster than bullets. We'd climb a hill and lose pressure, the fan screaming while the gauge kissed red. You'd shut down, pray for wind, and watch Germans get away because your tank was boiling. Men cursed the design, cursed the engineers who never saw combat, cursed the Army's obsession with procedure. I just listened, to the engines gasping for breath. When the brass inspected our vehicles before the Italian push, they made sure every part matched factory spec. My hands itched to fix what wasn't on their checklist. I knew the cooling system was a bad joke: single loop, small radiator, no margin for real heat. But we were told the design had passed tests in California. California doesn't have the Arno Valley. I started collecting things the Army didn't notice: short sections of copper tube, spare hose clamps, a half-dead electric pump from a Jeep I was supposed to scrap. I told myself it was habit. Truth was, I was already planning something, even if I didn't yet know its shape. Most nights I lay under the hull with a flashlight between my teeth, tracing the coolant lines. The steel was cold even in Italian summer. I pictured airflow, pressure, the way a pump could pull heat off the block if it just had help. I wasn't thinking about disobedience then, just survival. Machines that overheat don't care about orders. The others thought I was strange. One called me Dr. Frankenstein. Another said, "You planning to make that Sherman breathe fire, Billy?" I laughed with them. Better that than explain. The truth is, I missed silence, the kind you get when an engine idles clean. The war had taken that from me. Every sound meant risk: piston slap, bearing knock, hiss of steam. Each noise was a reminder that rules written in Washington couldn't keep a man alive in Tuscany. So I did what I'd always done. I listened. I imagined a heartbeat steadier than fear, a rhythm of pistons cooled by something more than regulation. And somewhere in that rhythm, a thought began to form, a machine that could outlast the desert and the mountains both. I didn't yet know I'd build it with junk and stubbornness, or that it would turn me into the man who broke orders to keep his crew breathing. I only knew that engines, like men, die when no one listens. The first mountain march taught us what arrogance smells like: burnt oil, boiling coolant, and fear baked into canvas seats. We started before dawn, engines idling in gray mist, and by noon 3 tanks had cooked themselves to death. No combat, no enemy, just heat. You could hear it when it happened, the cough of a starving engine, the metallic whine, then a pop like a pistol sh*t as pressure burst the cap. The valley echoed with curses and hissing steam. I knew why. The Sherman's heart was a radial engine meant to soar, not crawl. Airflow through the cooling baffles depended on motion and altitude, both things tanks lack. The fan was too small, the ductwork sloppy, the radiator undersized. Once the hull filled with dust, the whole system suffocated. I told my lieutenant as much while we stood over an engine deck bleeding steam like a kettle. "Sir, if we add a secondary loop, just a pump feeding back into the main line, we could drop the temperature 10, maybe 15 degrees. He squinted at me through heat shimmer. "A loop? Carter, you're a mechanic, not an engineer. Leave the tank alone." "Yes, sir," I said, which in my language meant not yet. We limped on until sunset, the entire column halted every mile to let engines cool. Men sprawled on hulls like lizards, smoking, cursing the designers. By nightfall, we had lost 2 tanks permanently. Both crews hitched rides forward, their vehicles abandoned under olive trees like dead elephants. That night the officers held their meeting under a tarp. I sat outside sharpening a screwdriver and listening. "Tomorrow," someone said, "we push before dawn again. Keep intervals tight. We can't delay for mechanicals." Another voice muttered, "Then we'll burn every damn tank before we reach Monte Vico." Laughter followed, the brittle kind that hides fear. When they turned in, I crawled under my Sherman with a flashlight and a handful of scrounged fittings. The ground was warm, smelled of grease and dry grass. I laid out the copper tubing I'd salvaged from a wrecked jeep, bent it by hand to form a narrow coil. Each turn hissed when it touched the hot hull. My fingers blistered. Sweat ran into my eyes. I worked by instinct, years of listening to engines, of guessing where the breath could move if you gave it space. I spliced the coil into the return line, added a small pump stolen from the water system of a field kitchen, wired it to a toggle under the seat. The pump purred faintly when I tested it, pushing coolant through the new loop. It was ugly, pipes crossing like veins, joints wrapped in rubber strips and wire, but it held pressure. By dawn, the jokes began. "What's Carter building now, a bathtub? Hey Icebox Billy, you expecting snow?" I smiled, didn't answer. The lieutenant glared but said nothing. We were moving out, and as long as the tank rolled, no one cared. For the first few miles, the column looked like hope, 5 Shermans chewing through dust, exhaust swirling gold in morning light. Then came the smell, burning paint, cooked antifreeze. One by one, they faltered. My temp gauge climbed but stopped short of the red, needle trembling steady. I flipped the switch. The little pump hummed alive beneath the floor, a vibration felt more than heard. The gauge settled. The engine tone smoothed out, deep and even. I tapped the dial once, just to be sure. Still steady. "Temperature?" Tony called from the driver's seat. "Normal," I said. It felt like a secret. By noon, when the others were idling on the roadside with hatches open, our Sherman kept moving. We circled back to tow one of the stragglers out of a ditch. The men cheered half-heartedly, dust masking their disbelief. "Guess Icebox Billy's trick works," someone muttered. That evening, the lieutenant inspected the coil under the hull. "You understand this violates regulation?" he said. "I understand it works," I replied. He didn't report me. He didn't have to, everyone saw the evidence. A week later, my design had a nickname, the refrigerator rig. They laughed, sure, but less each day. Because while they sweated over dead engines, ours purred like it was born for heat. Still, I knew I'd crossed a line. Regulations aren't written for common sense, they're written to protect command from imagination. And I'd just proven imagination could save a tank. That night, lying against the hull, I heard the coolant circulating through my makeshift veins. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost human. For the first time in months, the machine sounded alive, and in that heartbeat of moving fluid, I realized I'd done something the Army never would, I'd given the Sherman a way to breathe. A week later, orders came down like thunder, a full assault toward Monte Vico. 60 miles of rock, dust, and bad geometry. Intelligence said German armor was dug in along the ridges, PAK-40s, machine G*N nests, mortars hidden in terraces of olive groves. Our job was to punch through. No shade, no water, no second chances. At briefing the captain said, "Speed is survival. Keep formation. No stops for cooling." Every man in the tent knew what that meant. Half our Shermans would be smoking husks before we reached the valley floor. But no one spoke. You don't argue with the map. We rolled out at dawn, sky still gray, air already thick with heat. The column stretched along a single mountain road like a train of steel animals. Dust rose and hung in curtains, visibility dropped to 20 yards. Engines droned, gearboxes screamed, radios hissed with half-heard prayers. 2 hours in, the first tank dropped out. Then another. Steam burst from engine grills in white jets, ghostly against the rising sun. The road began to smell of antifreeze and despair. I kept one eye on my gauge, flirting high, but steady. The patchwork pump beneath the floor ticked faintly, a pulse under my boots. I'd left it off until now, running it too early risked bursting the hoses. But when the third tank stalled ahead of us, blocking the road, I flipped the switch. A soft hum answered. Coolant moved, vibration gentle and even. The needle hesitated, then began to slide down, one mark at a time. Pressure good, Tony reported, voice flat with disbelief. Hold the line, I said. The lieutenant's voice cracked over the net, all units advance. Don't clog the road. So we pushed forward, weaving past stranded tanks. Men waved rags from hatches, faces streaked black from exhaust. Somewhere up the slope a German G*N opened fire. The first shell struck the lead Sherman, #42, square through the glacis. The sound wasn't an explosion so much as a metallic collapse. The tank stopped existing in the middle. Fire rolled out both hatches. 42's dead in the water, someone shouted. 49's burning, another voice cried. The radio dissolved into chaos, half screams, half static. Then came the thunder of more PAK-40s. The ridgeline flashed, one muzzle after another. Smoke. Where's the damn smoke? No answer. The forward platoon had no smoke rounds left. All they had were overheated tanks pinned in the open. Billy, we're next, Tony muttered. Not yet, I said. Not while she's breathing. I felt the engine's rhythm through the deck, strong, even. The heat wasn't choking it anymore. I eased the throttle open. The Sherman responded with a growl, deeper than before. We started moving again, crawling through fire and debris. To our right, a half-track burned bright enough to throw shadows on the rocks. German infantry darted between stone walls, trying to flank the crippled tanks. I swung the turret and sent an he round into the nearest wall. Stone exploded, dust swallowed the figures. Range 200, adjust left, the G*Ner called. We fired again. Another G*N position silenced. The tank rocked, recovered, kept moving. The smell inside was unbearable, cordite, oil, sweat, but it meant life. I toggled the pump to its highest setting, the hum rose, steady as a heartbeat. For a moment I forgot the rules, forgot the manuals. There was only the vibration under my feet and the cold logic of survival. Outside, the valley was turning into a furnace. Air shimmered, shells screamed overhead, the ground trembled with each hit. A supply truck exploded behind us, throwing flaming fragments across the road. Tony flinched but kept his hands firm on the levers. Still holding, he said. Good girl, I murmured, patting the sidewall like the hide of a horse. When the smoke cleared for a second, I saw the enemy battery on the slope, 4 PAK-40s dug into terraces, their barrels shifting like snakes. Every intact Sherman around us was dead still, crews hiding in the heat haze. If we stopped now, we'd join them. I jammed the throttle. The tank lurched forward, engine roaring, treads grinding loose stones into sparks. Carter, what the hell are you doing? The lieutenant's voice snapped over radio. Advancing, sir, I said. While the engine still wants to. We climbed the slope, cannon spitting. One round struck a G*N position, men scattered. Another hit the ammunition pile, flame burst sky high. Through the periscope I saw silhouettes running, we *P*NS dropped. For 22 hours we fought like that, stop, fire, move, always moving. When night fell, number 23 was still running. Every other tank was either silent or smoking. The pump still hummed. The temperature gauge held steady. And for the first time in the entire campaign, I trusted the machine more than the orders. Regulation said I had no right to touch that engine. The sheet that hung on every motor pool wall shouted it in red. Unauthorized modification constitutes sabotage. But the order of the day, keep moving, no halts, had already K*led more tanks than enemy G*NS. So I reached for the switch. The pump gave a low hum, deep as a sleeping dog's growl. A vibration moved through the deck plates, up my legs, into my chest. The temperature needle trembled, then held. Outside, sunlight baked the armor until paint blistered. Inside, the air thickened with exhaust and sweat. If my fix burst, we'd drown in scalding coolant. The pipes were sealed with little more than wire and instinct. I had stolen rubber hose from a truck's brake system, soldered joints using a messed-in flame. Nothing about it belonged in the Army's manuals. One failure and the crew would never even have time to scream. I knew the risk. I also knew the choice, cook to death by the book, or live by the sin. All right, old girl, I whispered. Let's prove them wrong. I slammed the throttle. The tank lunged forward, all 30 tons snarling. Rocks scattered beneath the treads. Smoke rolled past the periscope, black as storm clouds. I could hear shouting on the net, orders, please, static. Somewhere ahead a voice screamed for cover, somewhere behind another tank exploded, the concussion shaking our ribs. The lieutenant's channel cracked through the chaos. #23, pull back. You're out too far. I didn't answer. There was no pulling back. We were the only thing still moving, and the only moving thing draws all the fire. I could see the tracers, white needles cutting the air, German G*NRs desperate to K*LL the one target that refused to die. G*N ready, barked O'Hara, our loader. Range 150, yelled our G*NR, Rizzo. Fire. The shell leapt, a solid thunderclap. The recoil shoved me against the console. Through the slit I saw the result, a German G*N pit vanished in a bloom of smoke and stone. We pivoted, moved again. The pump's rhythm stayed constant, tick, 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 circulating the lifeblood of the machine. For a moment the sound of it cut through the battlefield noise. I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer wrongness of calm inside chaos. Behind us, stranded crews watched through hatches. Men waved, some shouting prayers, others disbelief. Number 23 kept climbing the ridge while their tank sat silent, engines locked, hatches glowing from heat. The lieutenant's voice came again, strained but different this time. #23, if you can reach the slope, flank them. Draw fire. Copy that, I said. The first time he'd called it an order after I'd already disobeyed. We crested a rise and saw the enemy line clear. Pak-40s dug into terraces, muzzle flashes stabbing through olive trees. I felt Rizzo's aim tighten, saw his knuckles whiten. 2 o'clock, range 300. On. Fire. The shell hit low, right into the ammo crates beside a G*N shield. The explosion rolled downhill, setting off another position like a chain of falling dominoes. Dust swallowed everything. For 10 minutes we were alone on that ridge, trading fire with ghosts in the smoke. Each impact threw dirt across the deck, ringing against the turret like hail. Every minute I waited for the temperature to spike, for steam to fill the hull, for my invention to betray us. But it didn't. The gauge never crossed the line. When our last shell fired, the valley fell silent except for the crackle of burning oil. Through the periscope, the hills shimmered red with firelight. The air smelled of copper and cordite. Pressure steady, Tony said softly, almost reverent. I nodded, unable to speak. We backed down the slope in low gear, the pumps still whispering, the metal cooling under our boots. Behind us, the ridgeline smoked like a forge. The radio was full of fragments, reports, names, static, but one sentence cut through. Only one tank still operational. Repeat, only one. I shut off the pump, finally. The silence felt heavy, holy somehow. In that stillness I understood what had happened. Disobedience had become doctrine. My hands, blistered and filthy, had built a machine that outlived the orders meant to govern it. For the rest of that night we stayed on standby near the edge of the valley, engine idling low, stars winking through drifting ash. The others slept against the hull. I sat awake, listening to the faint tick of cooling metal. It sounded like breath, slow, patient, alive. Tomorrow, command would ask for reports. They'd want to know why one Sherman survived when 12 did not. I already knew the answer, because rules melt faster than steel. Morning came like smoke, thin, gray, without mercy. The valley was quiet except for the crackle of cooling metal. Charred hulls dotted the road below, black silhouettes against white dust. Birds wouldn't even land. Everything smelled of fuel and silence. Captain Lewis Porter arrived before sunrise in a jeep caked with mud and disbelief. He climbed onto my tank without asking, boots scraping soot from the armor. The man looked like the war had chewed him halfway, stubble thick, eyes bloodshot *T, uniform stiff with salt. He stared at the patchwork pipes running under the hull, then back at me. "I thought you'd lost your damn mind," he said. "Maybe I did, sir. But it kept us alive." He didn't answer. Just squatted, tracing a finger over one of the soldered joints, the rubber seal I'd made from cut canteen straps. He tapped the small pump housing with his knuckle. "You built this out of a kitchen rig?" "Field stove, sir. Same wiring. Pressure's steady up to 150. He let out a long breath that sounded like a laugh that had died on the way out. "And it ran?" 22 hours, sir. Still does." Porter straightened, looked across the valley where smoke curled from wrecks. 3 companies, he said quietly. "Every tank dead but yours." I said nothing. I didn't feel proud, only hollow. Machines shouldn't outlive men, but sometimes they do. By noon, the rumor had spread like fuel on gravel. Mechanics from other outfits came to see the Frankenstein Sherman. They crawled under her belly, scribbled notes on ration wrappers, argued over tubing diameters. Some laughed, others cursed, but they all listened when the pump switched on, a low hum that sounded like logic itself. One corporal from the 37th Company whistled. "Son of a G*N, she's breathing." That night, under lantern light, the field depot turned into a workshop. Men scavenged anything that could move liquid, jeep pumps, radio fans, even medical suction motors. Hoses disappeared from water trailers. Within hours, other tanks began sprouting makeshift veins of copper and rubber, each one uglier than mine. The officers didn't stop it. They couldn't. The order had already become self-fulfilling: keep moving. No halts. My system was the only way to obey it. 2 days later, the engineers wrote a report for headquarters. It had a long title: Field Cooling Augmentation Systems, Unauthorized, Preliminary Findings. In the margin, someone had typed, "Engine failures reduced by approximately 47%. No names mentioned. No signatures either, just the faceless approval of necessity. I watched them copy my setup on other tanks. They made improvements: cleaner welds, proper fittings, even gauges from aircraft surplus. But the idea stayed the same. One night, a sergeant from maintenance brought me a cup of coffee and said, "You know, they'll never put your name on it." "I know," I said. "Does that bother you?" I looked at the ground. "Wouldn't change how it runs." That week we pushed north again. The column rolled through towns reduced to rubble and silence. The new cooling rigs hissed like breathing animals, a chorus of metal lungs. Engines stayed steady. None boiled over. Once, near Florence, we stopped at a repair station where a young lieutenant from Ordnance tried to take notes for a formal proposal. He asked for schematics, safety tests, material sources. I told him I had none, just a feel for when heat turns desperate. He frowned, wrote something polite, and left. I knew what his report would say: field improvisation under duress. Not reproducible. But it was reproducible. It was contagious. Within a month, every company in the 5th Armored had its own Billy rig. Some used electric pumps, some mechanical. Some just added extra tubing and prayed. The manuals hadn't changed, but the men had. Once you survive by breaking rules, you stop pretending the rules are sacred. On the night before the next offensive, I sat on the hull watching sparks from the depot rise into the dark. The engine ticked softly beneath me, metal settling, alive. Tony handed me a can of cold beans. "You ever think they'll give you a medal for this?" he asked. I shook my head. Medals go to the ones who shoot straight, not the ones who turn wrenches crooked. He chuckled. "Still, hell of a thing you did." I didn't answer. I was thinking of the first night I crawled under this tank, the smell of hot dust, the sound of engines dying all around. I remembered how the manual had forbidden exactly what saved us. By morning, we were moving again, engines steady in the pale heat. The sound of those pumps filled the valley, a faint mechanical heartbeat echoing through dust and olive trees. Somewhere behind us, a clerk typed the final version of the report. The paper would reach HQ, maybe Washington, filed under technical notes. The field line that mattered was at the bottom, operational improvement observed. No credit. No reprimand. No record. Just results, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes survival is the only authorization a man needs. When the G*NS finally fell silent in spring '45, we crossed the Alps on engines that still bore my fingerprints. I didn't feel victorious, only exhausted, scraped hollow by heat and noise. We rolled through villages where the walls leaned inward like drunks, the air thick with lime dust and surrender. Someone handed me a bottle of wine. I didn't drink it. I remember only the silence that followed months of thunder. It felt heavier than sound. Demobilization came fast. 1 week you're a soldier, the next you're cargo. I shipped home on a Liberty vessel that smelled of diesel and wet rope. The sea stretched gray to every horizon, and the men on deck spoke in murmurs, as if afraid to wake the ghosts trailing behind. Amarillo looked smaller when I returned, streets flat and bright, wind pushing dust against storefront glass. My father had passed that winter, the garage stood empty, padlock rusted shut. I cut it open and stepped inside. The air smelled of oil and time. I found his old wrench on the bench, the handle polished smooth from decades of work. I hung my army jacket beside it and started over. Word spread that I was back. Farmers brought in trucks that coughed like old men. Ranchers hauled in generators and water pumps. I fixed them all. People paid in whatever the new ration system allowed, sugar, fuel, sometimes nothing at all. It didn't matter. What mattered was the rhythm, engine, breath, heartbeat. On the far wall, above the bench, I bolted a piece of curved tubing, the same scrap that had once run coolant through Sherman No. 23. The metal was scarred and pitted from heat, one end twisted where a shell fragment had grazed it outside Monte Vico. To most eyes it was junk. To me it was proof that reason could survive war. Years passed. The garage roof sagged, my hands grew slower, but engines still came alive beneath them. Sometimes boys from the high school stopped by, pretending to help while sneaking looks at the war relics stacked in the corner. One asked if the stories were true, if I'd really saved a whole company with some crazy homemade thing. I told him no. I saved one tank, and the rest saved themselves after. He looked disappointed, so I added, I just didn't want the engine to die before we did. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. At night, when the town slept and the prairie wind sang against the tin roof, I'd sit alone by the workbench, lamp burning low. The old pipe threw a crooked shadow across the wall. Sometimes I thought I could still hear the hum of that pump, faint and steady, the sound of defiance measured in revolutions per minute. Letters came from old crewmen, Tony from New York, Rizzo from Ohio. Most talked about families, farms, used car lots. None mentioned the war directly. But every few lines I caught glimpses of the same memory, a valley of smoke, a tank that refused to die. The army never printed my name in any manual. I wasn't expecting it. But in 1946 an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a photograph taken from behind, a column of tanks, each with a network of new pipes glinting under sun. On the back, someone had written, "She's still breathing." No signature. I knew the handwriting. By the 50s, the kids called every field modification a Billy fix. Radios, tractors, trucks, it didn't matter. Anything cobbled together to keep moving carried that name. I pretended to hate it, but truth be told, I liked hearing it whispered across a field when an engine sputtered back to life. Sometimes veterans passing through town stopped by the shop. They'd see the pipe on the wall, nod, and say nothing. We didn't need words, we'd both learned the same rule the hard way, that obedience keeps you safe only until it k*LLSU. In winter, when the cold turned wrenches brittle and the wind cut through the cracks in the door, I'd light the stove, sit on a crate, and remember that August in Italy. The smell of dust and cordite, the taste of sweat and iron, the way the pump vibrated under my boots like a heartbeat that belonged to both man and machine. Sometimes my son would wander in, sleepy-eyed, asking what I was thinking about. I'd nod toward the pipe. That thing kept us alive, I'd say. He'd trace the dents with his finger, frown, and ask if it was worth it, risking punishment, breaking orders. I'd look at the floor, hear again the hiss of cooling metal, the quiet after battle. Then I'd tell him the only truth I know, a rule's a fine thing, son, until it tells you to die when you could live. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves, carrying with it the echo of that hum, the sound of a tank in defiance, still breathing through the dust of memory. They called it Icebox Billy's trick for a few months, then forgot the name, as armies do. Manuals moved on, new wars started, new machines took shape. But every time I heard an engine hold steady in summer heat, I wondered if a piece of that old idea still pulsed somewhere under the armor. By 1953, when Korea filled the newspapers, I saw photos of Shermans still in service, uglier, heavier, fitted with bigger fans and auxiliary pumps. No one mentioned who first thought of running a second loop. Didn't matter. The blueprint had lived, which meant the logic had survived. You can't k*ll an idea once it's proved itself under fire. The years rolled by like slow treads on dry ground. I rebuilt carburetors, raised a son who preferred books to wrenches, buried friends who'd served beside me. Time erodes memory the same way heat eats metal. It doesn't break it at once, just wears it smooth until the edges disappear. Yet some nights, when I closed the shop, the silence rang like that battlefield, muffled, metallic, endless. On the anniversary of the Arno push, I received a letter from an old Army engineer named Porter, the same captain who'd climbed onto my tank that morning after the fight. His handwriting had stiffened, but the words still marched in formation. They're teaching your cooling method at Aberdeen now. Not by name. Just field thermal loop, type 23. Figured you'd want to know. I read that line twice, then folded the letter and slid it behind the pipe on my wall. I didn't need the credit. I just liked that the number, 23, had followed her all the way home. My boy grew up with that pipe watching over him. He'd do homework at the bench while I worked, pencil scratching against the sound of an old V8 coughing to life. When he turned 16, he asked if he could enlist. Said he wanted to build airplanes, not fight. I told him to learn first, to fix what's broken before someone hands you a G***N. He went to college instead, became an engineer. Sometimes his friends visited the shop, wanting stories. I'd give them the short version: Italy, 1944, a tank that refused to die. They'd laugh, until they saw the scars on the pipe, the melted solder, the way it still smelled faintly of burned coolant when the air got warm. Then they'd fall quiet, as if hearing the ghost of the pump inside it. One winter, decades later, a veterans magazine tracked me down. A reporter called, polite voice, asking for an interview about technological improvisations during combat. I said no. He asked again, promised recognition, photographs, maybe a medal presentation. I told him the same thing I told the lieutenant that night: it ran. That's all that matters. He didn't understand. They never do. They think invention comes from genius. It doesn't. It comes from fear, the raw, practical kind that smells of oil and skin. You fix the thing in front of you or you die beside it. Everything else is paperwork. I kept the shop open until I couldn't lift a wrench. Arthritis stole the grip from my fingers, the same hands that once welded a lifeline under fire. When the doctors told me to rest, I laughed. Rest is what k*LLS engines. Still, I obeyed this last order. After I retired, I spent evenings on the porch listening to highway trucks in the distance. Each one had a hum beneath the gears, a faint mechanical heartbeat. It sounded like company. One July afternoon, a parcel arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo, a modern armored vehicle, sleek, cold, gray. On its rear deck, a small plate read auxiliary cooling unit, type 23 series. Someone had written below it in pencil, still breathing. I pinned it to the wall beside the pipe. The two pieces of history, one dented, one new, framed the story better than any metal could. Sometimes my grandson visits. He climbs onto the stool, runs his fingers over the old metal, and asks if the story's true. I tell him yes, mostly. He wants to know if I was scared. I tell him always. Then I point at the scarred pipe, the solder seems dulled by years of dust, and say, courage isn't loud, kid. It's a small pump running quiet when everything else quits. He nods, though I'm not sure he understands yet. One day he will. He'll learn that rules keep machines running, until they don't. That sometimes the right choice comes wrapped in the wrong order. At night, after they've gone, I turn off the lights and let the dark settle. The pipe catches a sliver of moonlight, gleaming faintly like it's still alive. I can almost hear the whisper of coolant through copper veins, the hum that once defied the heat of Italy. They laughed at the refrigerator tank. But when the world was melting, it was the only one still breathing. And if that's not legacy, I don't know what is. They laughed at my refrigerator tank. Said it looked like a farmer's joke welded to government steel. But when the valley burned and the gauges burst, only one tank kept moving, ours. The others called it luck. I knew better. It was defiance wrapped in copper and rubber, faith sealed with wire. 22 hours we ran through fire and dust, the pump humming like a steady heart. Now, years later, the sound still follows me. When I close the garage at night, I hear it under the silence, soft, patient, alive. They'll never print my name in manuals, never carve it into plaques. That's fine. Because somewhere, on a hot road half a world away, an engine keeps running a little longer than it should. And maybe a kid inside wonders why it hasn't died yet. If he listens close enough, he'll hear it too. The quiet hum that says rules end where survival begins.